Welcome to Hemida Diary, the podcast where African women share their real stories, bold moves, and behind the scenes moments that shaped their journey. I'm your host, Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, and with each episode, we're pulling back the curtain on what it really means to build a media career, to break barriers, and stay true to your voice. So, whether you're just starting out or you're already making waves, this space is for you. In today's episode, our focus is on the rise of technology facilitated gender based violence, often abbreviated as TFGBV, and how artificial intelligence and social media platforms are shaping and sometimes threatening women's safety and freedom online. Today, I'm joined by someone who doesn't just report the data, she makes it. Mwende Mukwanyaga is a journalist, ethnographer, and creative whose work refuses to separate storytelling from lived experience. She's part activist, part artist, part builder, literally compiling her own data sets on gender based violence when institutions fail to do so. She joins us to talk about TFGBV and risks of AI generated harm and what it means to reclaim data with care and with creativity. So stay with us. Okay, so Wendy, welcome to Hemida Diary podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation, but before we go into the AI and the heavy stuff, who is Wendy outside of data and journalism? Tell us about your upbringing and what shaped your creative spirits.
Right. So I think outside Mwende the journalist is Mwende the fermenter. So I do ferment teas. I do a lot of
Wow.
yes, kombuchas, and I also brew a bit of the ginger bugs. So I'm making probiotic sodas and kefir. So I'm into the fermenting bit a lot. I have recently picked up jewelry. And I think dueling for me has been a very interesting space because it requires intricacy. It's a very delicate art. And it's also an art that screams like mistakes. It's visible, very visible mistakes. And I think outside of that, I also do enjoy watching birds a lot, a lot, a lot. So I've set up my balcony in a way where I'm able to sit outside every single morning to, to watch the birds. So I've always been a very curious person, right from when I was a child, and I think that has really shaped my coming into this space of AI, and I'll get to it just in the larger sense of the everyday, for example, the fermenting, the slowness, the time it takes, how quickly some, like an introduction of, let's say, ratios which shouldn't be there, and like your entire batch is gone. So I think it's teaching me a lot, like just being able to translate my world in the everyday, the hobbies, the non-serious is giving me a lot of structure for how to think about the ethical frameworks that I'm hoping to build and continue to investigate and interrogate. So yeah, that's
That's
it.
really interesting how something like, the hobby and the things in your personal life actually shape how you approach in these very important conversations. So I will confess that I do not have the greenest hands in terms of like, gardening is one of those things. I just look at my garden and I'm just exhausted already. I've never stepped outside. But actually, in the last couple of weeks, I saw the garden of a friend of mine. He posted it on social media. I was like, wow, John, your garden looks amazing. Look at mine, it's a mess. What do I do? You know, and I've
Yeah.
actually picked up on the art of kind of like, starting off with a small board and watering it every day and,
Mm.
deweeding and creating a safe space for it to grow. And it's just been about 3 weeks. And I've only done a small part of my garden. But actually, there's a sense of, I don't know how to describe it, it's quite therapeutic.
I'm so
It
glad.
teaches
Yes,
you patience,
yes,
as well,
yes.
because you realize that actually you're not going to get that whole garden done in the next year. Like, just don't rush. You're gonna need to take
Absolutely.
time. So it sounds like some of
And
these things
structure.
around patience, yeah,
Mm.
and structure is also kind of, something that you're taking from your personal. How did you begin? How did all of that manifest for you from a young age?
So from a young age, I think it's I have grown up with a mom who she's very, I'll say permiss. She allows me to be. And in the allowing was also, I think, allowing me to ask a lot of questions and also allowing me to do a lot of experiments. So I think I've run so many losses, like an experiment with anything that I set my heart on to this week. I'm going to do bidding and I'm bored. So next week I'm like, oh wow, a new hobby found. And I think in her entertaining my just curiosity.
Diversity.
Yeah, the curiosity also allowed me to grow into a space where I'm able to my brain also is able to, like, I think more or less move through various mediums, experiences, and like take one thing, for example, when you're even like learning how to do things when you're small, it's, for example, realizing how something you learned in the kitchen, let's say that if you apply oil on these labels, um the labels that they stick on ceramics, like the cups, etc., it will come off, right? But like this is also, I mean, when you come to class, I'm able to very quickly relate in my chemistry that this when the teacher is talking about like this chemical reaction, it's not something that's so removed from like your everyday. So I feel like it's been a very great experience now for me, moving from I'm able to, or I'm allowed to experience a myriad of things. So in turn, I'm also able to like translate these things to the everyday. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've got three girls. My eldest
Oh,
just became a teenager over the weekend, and
congratulations.
parenting is, thank you. I feel as if it's my birthday, but parenting is not easy for
Yeah.
anybody, but it's also not easy when you're trying to be that parent that allows the child to be the child while also still
Mm.
also trying to maintain some certain boundaries. But from your perspective, how important was that for you growing up, being allowed to explore your curiosities, as you put
Mm.
it, and and also navigating those boundaries that you inevitably have as well?
So I think that's a very beautiful question because I think for me, it first allowed me to ask institutions questions. Ask, and from institutions, I even mean like at the most basic, your parents, being able to question your parents allows you or gives you a lot of room to also start questioning bigger systems as you grow, and you're able to be like, this here doesn't feel right, one two three, like would look different, or I feel this and this type of way. And the second thing I think for me was in the permission, you also start learning the responsibilities and my limitations, which was also extremely important because it's important that you realize there is going to be, for example, consequences when you do certain things, right? So yes, you do them. Go and try to light a fire. You'll catch a beating. You will perhaps get burnt. But like, it's consequences will be there. But like, I think it's just that space for. I think it's also given me a lot of permission in terms of like with the failing, right? Because that's where a lot of us also are very touchy. So it's a space where I feel okay to try things even when I am not sure of outcomes, or even when the outcomes I know there'll be consequences which might be painful or won't look a certain way. So yeah, it was extremely, that aspect is extremely important into molding like the person I'm moving through the world now, because also even the activism ties a lot into my being able to start the questioning pretty much earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've described yourself as a journalist, a photographer, a florist, and we're hearing about the teas now, a mixologist. So now we understand that. So, which is such a rich palette, right? And we've kind of talked about how your upbringing kind of shaped that. But when did you realize that storytelling, and especially data storytelling, was your way of resisting silence?
So I will give a very small spoiler. I was in a competition which you should not look up.
Okay,
We failed
okay, okay.
miserably. My team failed miserably. However, within this competition, one of the it was an investigative journalism. So all my life first, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer because I talk a lot, and I do stand up to people a lot. So like my entire lifetime, I knew I wanted to be that, and my compositions were great. So in Kenya, we have um, in English we write, like, as part of the test you have to write an essay composition, and it's like quite a big chunk of like marks. So I used to excel in that a lot because it requires a lot of creative thinking. So with the storytelling, I think I've always had it in me in terms of the writing. But the journalism, the data journalism began during that competition because we had a session where I remember one the setting. So I'm going to set this in the sense of they were trying to explain how many bombs the US has rained on different Middle Eastern countries across the different regions. How they showcased this was in form of rainfall intensity. So from showers and then all the way to thunderstorms during Obama's time. And in my head, it was like this is the simplest way to ever explain a war. Like the simplest way to ever explain. Like this, a child could understand this,
And
right?
it's relatable, exactly. It's something that we can all kind of understand the
Really.
difference between a light shower and that thunder.
So I think for me, that was the beginning of the exploration for beyond the investigative world, beyond the data which we now have hands on. How do I communicate data in a way that makes sense to a person who perhaps is just moving about their day, not a technical person, not someone who even cares in the slightest about what we're talking about. So I think that was the beginning of my conviction into this space. But also, I have been doing GBV work since 2017, 2016. So for me, GBV is also a space where it's personal, and it's in the sense that there is a lot of systemic failure, for example, in Kenya, and we've had to create systems and collectives that support survivors or even like families of victims who succumb to GBV. So I think for me, this has also shaped the ways in which I see the world, right? And it has shaped the ways in which I view and interact, for example, with tech. So the activism for me, it's also like in the sense of you cannot afford to be silent, the silence as complicity. So for me now, merging those two things where now I'm finding grounding in a space where one, the data is complex, the language is technical. How do I explain to you in the simplest terms what this data means? And then take that and like, how do I also make sure that this data causes impact? So I think that for me, is the intersection of my work. How do I explain this simply? And how do I make this count?
Yeah, yeah. And you've done something that many institutions haven't, which is to build a gender-based violence data set, a GBV data set from the ground up, right? What sparked that decision, and how did it change how you see data, especially data on women's experience? And also we should come back to what you just said about how do you then translate that GBV data to something that everyday people understand.
So, let me first start with how we began the building. And this began in conversation about Valentine's.
Okay.
And Valentine's, I love Valentine's. I love a holiday.
Me
Um,
too. Me too. Me too. Any chance to eat chocolates and celebrate is my thing. Yeah.
in fact, yeah, we declare today a holiday for you, Dr.
Yeah,
Yemi.
exactly. Exactly.
Um, so Valentine's, I think for me was the concept of like love, and one of the conversations going around that time, there was a femicide case that had just happened, which was like touching home, pretty much home, I'll say. It's someone we went to school with. It was a very high profile femicide case. And I remember sitting through and like seeing people's thoughts around the femicide, how the women are being killed because we like money, we like sponsors, we don't work for our things, we eat people's money. It was a whole like, and how it and also I think the other framing around that was the men abusing women are not human or people. And I think that's a very harmful trope also because it
Yeah.
removes a lot, like it's so I think now for me that was the shape of a container within which I was working. And it was first going back to the narratives. What narratives are people pushing around femicide? Okay, that women are being killed because of one, two, three, and they seemingly are being killed by strangers. And we do the first collection of like a few data sets, and like it's interesting to first note that the few cases we had collected, let's say the first 20 cases, like all of them were done by either ex-husbands, ex-boyfriends, boyfriends, partners, so someone very close home, right? Intimate partners. Thank you. So I think for me it was a very interesting first. You pose and data is saying a very big story of patterns, which in isolated cases, and I think this is a thing I've been saying, we tend to report on GBV and TFGBV as isolated cases, and we miss the very big patterns happening. So, for instance, now when we put these 20 cases together and you realize there's a pattern of intimate partner abuse, it's already dispelling a very big misconception that we have that GBV is happening within this space. So we had to introduce, of course, like tools. There was like AI tools models involved to pick out from the news stories. So like we literally like got data sets for the news stories in thousands, and like just ran through names, and then we did legal, where you have to check, so you have to also like the criteria which you're describing, for example femicide, and we had to go with the UN one. And of course there's like critique because the UN one doesn't capture the entire story of what I think femicide should be. So I think that was also like I think just the beginning of our work. And I was talking to Irene and Lobna and telling them I wish I had my hands on Chigali Declaration before the onset of this work. It would have shifted.
Thank you.
It would have a big chunk of the approach. It would have grounded a bit of like the things which sometimes we threw some things out because they felt like they were gut instincts and they were not grounded in anything. So it's very hard for you to like make a case for something that's just, I feel like um so I think for me that has been a big chunk of the why, but also now coming to the TFGBV one, I am currently building a platform dossier for interrogating the platform failures. And this is coming from a place where I'm realizing that from the onset, the platforms have been designed for violence, right? So, for example, like you look at Croc, and there is no way on earth why Grok should have come um, to us like without having safeguards and guardrails around people being able to undress women, like on the most basic sense, right? And that's going to show us like people who are building these systems, they're not thinking about like women on that, like, or even like I'll say women and like other vulnerable groups like the LGBTQ plus, because it's also violence that's very specific to certain vulnerable groups, right? And I think that's the same thing with looking at guardrails, for example, around things like TikTok and realizing that they allow things like child sexual exploitation to happen in the guise of lifestyle content. And that's something that's really bugging me, just in terms of we are not our methodology in terms of reporting around tech in Africa is missing a big chunk of interrogating the platforms, the algos, the codes. So I think that's exactly where my mind is at right now, because I am very concerned that we're just building. And then it's very reactive as opposed to proactive measures when it comes to the safety. And that's not something that we can actually allow to continue persisting as we go.
Yeah. And you often say that data is power. And in your work, it feels more like data is also about care, right? And being proactive
Yes.
in thinking forward and not waiting until the feedback to react, right? So,
Mhm.
in this world where generative AI is producing all those fake images and mimicking voices and causing harm, what are you seeing in terms of how these forms of technology is being used against women, but then also in connection to your what you just said about the platforms building with that consideration, how should we be engaging with these platforms to make sure that they are proactively thinking about these things?
So I'll start first with the role, how the platforms are mostly exacerbating the TFGBV. So I think for me, there are three things with in terms of the how. So the scale and speed of harm is accelerated, right? So let's talk about things like the deepfakes producing, and I think the Nigerian case has really sat with me this week. So the entire of this week, there is a lady's picture, which was manipulated on the Nigerian X circle, and they basically depicted her as having like being in a relationship with one person, and like another person is claiming her. Basically, they labeled her many names, and it's been very crazy to see how they've circulated. So it's been a network. It was a network of like blue check accounts. And when I said how the blue check first, the kind of reach that they have is phenomenal. So she kept getting threats. She got texts. She was abused on texts. People did entire long threads to, talk about women and their bad habits and etc. So I think for me, it's been very um, crazy to watch the scale and speed at which AI is helping like harm be perpetuated. The second thing for me has been the biased moderation. So no matter how many, and I've been watching so far, it's only two of the tweets from the blue check accounts which have been taken down. um and women are really rallying under the comments to report, right? And even for us to report, but like it's taking quite a lot of time before they say anything has been done. I've gotten one back where they're like it does not go against community guidelines. So I think there's also that because they don't understand also the nuance of, for example, pidgin. So there is that where they miss it out, and like they don't flag that as a harm when it should be flagged as a really, really big harm. And then lastly, I think the other thing we've been seeing in terms of exacerbation is the surveillance. So it's been it's growing more and more in terms of like the stalker aspects, where like even when, for example, now on X, even when you block someone, they can still keep up with your everyday, right? And that's a big gap in terms of being able to safeguard any person. So, for instance, if you are a person experiencing like this particular lady, it's that even when you block the people from this account, they can still see, they can screenshot and like make fun of your work and your account still. Um, Now, in terms of like the things, and I'm glad you've actually brought up like the Imagine harms, the AI generated and consensual deepfakes. And a lot of this is teetering towards like pornographic content. So I think there's a lady who did a test yesterday where she asked okay, so she was using two non-paid options, so like two free versions of like Gen AI, and one which was she was paying for. So, and I'll use an example also with Canva, which I'm very conversant with Canva AI, where there are certain things you ask Canva and Canva will totally refuse to do. But take that to Grok, which is free and very easily accessible, and it's happy to do that, right? So I think it's been a very interesting but to see that kind of harm imagine, and especially with the free to use. The second one, which is now on the rise and I think will be crazier as we move, has been romance fraud. And I'll take us back to the Tinder swindler story that came out quite a while. Um, but now, the Tinder swindler in that time, remember, Jenny, I was not where we are at now. We're in a space where we can literally be on this call and the Mwende you're seeing on your end is not who's here.
Okay, yeah. Which is scary, yeah. Yeah.
Extremely scary, extremely scary. And I do not think that, for me, I've been very scared, especially on the dating platforms. That's another space, in terms of the platform dossiers I'm talking about, that I want to interrogate a bit. What safeguards are you actually putting around the usage of AI and AI tools, and like the fraud that would occur within this space? Then maybe the other thing, looking at the algorithms and what they reward. So I think, and this has been very, very clear with the manosphere content I'm talking about now in Nigeria, where we are looking at content, like content that's trolling the girl going viral, and content that's trying to defend the girl, still like not making like as like even half the views of these other one, or the ones that you're trying to debunk, they're not moving as quickly. So the algo rewards some topics, right? And I think that's been very and the blue check accounts know that, and that's what they exploit, because they know, like, so long as something can more or less evoke some kind of emotion, the algo is very happy to spread that out. Then lastly, I think for me, the one which has been sitting heavy, and this is basically from TikTok. It's not just TikTok, but like it's modeled a lot on TikTok, where it's the gamified harassment. So people using, for example, TikTok challenges, um, and maybe the sounds, And I'll give an example of like Kenya. There's a song that basically, during this femicide conversation, a song that has like femicide connotation was being used on some posts, and like you're left feeling very injured about it, but it's so hard to report to TikTok and like give context for why this is actually extremely harmful. So I think for me, that's something I'm really, really concerned about, because it's also something that hides in plain sight, but it's also so, so deeply wounding, right? In terms of engaging the platforms, I'm realizing that one of the big places where we have failed as the media practitioners is we are not giving feedback and like on public, we're not giving public feedback in that sense. We're just disgruntled, but like no one is writing about like the harms. No one is keeping tabs about, like, for example, if X said that they will always uphold certain standards, like why are we not holding them up to the things that they've said? So I think for us, it's also a big chunk of, we need to revise the methodology in which we are reporting on harm. Like, let it stop being just this this one incidence of, let's say, deepfake porn has happened. It's not one incidence. It's about us coming and let's interrogate what structures about X allowed for this to, one, be created, number two, be amplified, and number three, take this much time to be taken down. So we need to have like better methodologies, yes.
Hello, Hermida Diary listeners. Permit me to introduce to you the Kigali Declaration on the Elimination of Gender Violence in and through Media in Africa. It's a groundbreaking commitment to address the forms of gender violence experienced by women in media and how media reports on gender-based violence. So, Whether you sign up as an individual or as an organization, it is a sign that you are pledging to consciously play your role in tackling this important issue and working towards creating safer and more inclusive work environments for everyone. Imagine a media landscape that treats every story with balance and every voice with dignity. By adopting the Kigali Declaration, it's not just a commitment, it's a powerful step towards social change. And that change starts with us. So if you are ready to take that bold step and make that social change, visit our website at africanwomeninmedia.com/declaration to read the declaration, to commit to it, and to begin to take action. Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, imagine I started our Awim 23 conference in Kigali in 2023
Mm.
with the sentence, imagine a world where, right? Imagine a world where platforms actually have a zero tolerance to gender-based
GBV.
violence through their platforms. Yeah, like that's literally the mantra,
Yeah,
the motto they need to take. Zero tolerance to
to
GBV,
GBV.
because you've given the example of Canva, right, where
Yeah.
it no matter you ask it certain questions and it just refuses to do it. So it
Mhm.
is possible. It is absolutely possible. It just
Very.
requires the will to say, okay, there's a boundary here that we just will not cross and compromise on,
A
right?
100%.
And one thing I also wanted to highlight is that what we're seeing here is not there are new forms of violence, but
Mm.
then actually a lot of this is just AI enabling existing forms of abuse and patterns through
Yes.
these new tools. How do you feel about that statement?
I actually agree. I actually agree. And I actually think one of the things I keep saying is online gender based violence and technology facilitated violence are mirrors of what happened on a day to day in real life. When you think stalking, I can come to your house or I can come to your account, right? I can beat you up physically or I can send trolls to beat you up on your account or I can come and troll you. So I like to think of like just like the violence you see on a day to day will be translated online. It just assumes a different medium, but it shall be translated. Now I like the thing you've introduced for AI more or less accelerating. And it's true because now it's a thing for if stalking has always existed, now for example, like I can create as many bot accounts as I want, right? And like automate as many messages as I want to you, or like automate as many like whatever things I want towards you. So I feel like you're absolutely right on AI accelerating and not it starting like absolutely new trends. Because even I like to think of it, for example, even when we're saying um grok undressing people. I'm like, this is not new violence. If you put that online and ask woman undressed, I'm sure it's going to bring quite a number of like things, right? So you're very right on that, Dr. Emisi.
And you've spoken about how there's no real line between social media and real life, which is basically what we're saying now, right? And that really resonates, especially when we're looking at technology facilitated gender-based violence and how it spills from the screen into people's lives. How do you approach building GBV data sets in this context of connection with the real life?
So connecting with now one, it's survivor at the center, right? Like survivor not just as a data point, but as an actual person who has experienced actual harm. So I think one, it's even in the most basic of the language that we'll use in terms of this collecting. I tend to collect a lot of data sets directly from the people, or if you're going to use, for example, like the articles that we need, we have to reach out, for example, for like consent to have some of things up, etc. So I think um in terms of approaching data set building. For me, I think just survivor at the center. And the other thing has been the time. So I've not been taking projects that require me to work in 2 days. Because
Because how can you? We're not machines. We're not AI.
And it's also
Yeah.
that before, for example, before we train the model on the kind of language, like before you train the model to not pick certain like words, these words are wrong. Like it takes time. It actually takes time before you come up with frameworks, before you decide this data we shall use, this we shall not for these various reasons. I'm huge on documenting like your process for how did you arrive at this decision, what other existing decisions did you have to make, If- so I think for me it's when I say the data needing time, I like projects which give me time to actually build the data set with the care it requires. Because when we rush it, it also means that I will not have time to think about the guardrails I need to put. I just need to give results, right? So it's been actively for us, specifically picking longer term projects which we're able to build on. And then now the second thing has been survivor being our compass. So like, is this supportive like to the survivor? Is this information we need to know? Because sometimes it's just that's a juicy detail, but like it's not the most important thing that I need to be telling the audience. So it's also been being able to discern what will be supportive, what will not. There are also things, for example, like there are parts of this work I don't let AI touch, right? So, like for example, the deciding, the annotations, there are aspects of this which you have to do so that you're able to give better direction to the models for how they pick up things and like what they drop. And I think there are many. We've actually like had to shelve some of like the models we were using. One model we were using for collecting the TFGBV data, because you soon realize we had trained it on data using like Kenyan data, but like you start realizing that it's giving you very non like it's very victim blaming kind of like mindset. But that's because the data you're using is also like looking a certain way, right? So that model had to go, because like retraining it would have taken much more time than just building, setting up. So I think for me, that's been the bigger compass for survivor must be at the center, but also like being very clear about the places where I'm willing for AI to do. Like the scraping can be tedious. We can automate that for sure. But like the legal things, there are things just where you have to ensure that a human being is there. Because AI, again, I like to say AI can understand patterns. AI does not understand emotion. AI does not understand pain. Yeah, and you can't teach AI to understand those things, but you as a human being can, right? So I engage AI to help me pick out patterns, help me see what all these cases are saying together, right? Tell me the big numbers, give me a dashboard, but like let me sit down and interpret and say that in the Kenyan system, the culturally this and this is happening, and this is the context, this is the container for the kind of violence we're seeing, the kind of data set we're seeing now. So I think that for me has been a bigger compass.
And I really want to spotlight something that was implicit in your response,
Mm,
because you are using AI,
yes,
right? We're
yes,
not saying don't use AI.
yes,
We're not saying we are enemies of AI. You're literally using AI to
yes,
do this very important work,
yes.
right? But that we're saying actually there are things that also need to be considered.
Mm,
There's the biases that AI brings into the work, right?
mm,
And there's the ways in which others might use AI negatively. So because also in this conversation when we're raising alarm, right, and raising awareness about the gendered experiences of these new tools, it can be misconstrued as if we're saying AI is a bad person here. Well, we're not saying that, are we?
No, no, no. What I'm actually very keen on saying is AI is not a neutral participant. It's not, don't use AI. It's not AI is good. It's not AI is bad. It's just, remember, it's not a neutral participant ever. So it's going to come in with your bias, with the biases of the people who built the data sets bias. It has bias everywhere. And one thing I've come to say is, as human beings, we cannot exist without biases. Even here, we have our own biases about like things. So I just think it's imperative that as we interact, you don't interact with AI as an absolute knowledge system. It's not a knowledge system. It doesn't have capacity to like even just be like the only player that you, for example, rely on for research. Yeah, it has to be something that like you remember this has been trained on the backs of other people, so it's upon you to interact with it the way you would in any other conversation. I like to interact, for example, with GPT as if I'm in a conversation with a friend who I like picking their mind, right? So you won't tell me, for example, it's sunny and I'm like, okay, cool, thanks. No, 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 no. How did you know it's sunny?
It's yeah, exactly.
You don't have eyes. How did you know it's funny? So like
Absolutely.
small,
Yeah.
small things where you start interact with AI from that POV of you're not an absolute knowledge system, and I should not trust you with like everything. I also think that's why I teeter a lot to Notebook LM, because it has hallucinations, yes, but it's also a lot of, it depends a lot on like the information I fed it, right? So like it gives me, so whenever I feed it garbage in, it gives me garbage out. Like, but when I give it good data, I can see direct results. So I think I'm also starting to ask and like imagine spaces. For example, I think when you said like a space where, because for Notebook now I'm able to very carefully curate what quote unquote the model is telling me, the way it speaks to me. Um, so even the way it reasons, the way it arrives at things, right? So I think that's also the other thing, because we're also in terms of using AI, though, Dr. Emise, I think the other thing we're lacking is patience and time, which we must be taught by our little hobbies. um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
because,
Yes.
for example, with GPTs, I think GPT, DeepSeek, and I'll say this with a big pinch of salt, because also when we say bias, I think it's important we talk about who owns the platforms. Um, so, with, for example, like the US investing in ChatGPT, the OpenAI, DeepSeek, China, there is going to be like actual things you have to contend with in terms of like the kind of information you're able to extract, get, or receive from that model. However, I think it's important that the models also allow us to be able to only exist. So, for example, the GPT, you can be able to train your own GPT in a way that it will still hallucinate, but the at least with the thought processing, it's able to think a bit better. So giving the models time, like don't just start. I think one of the things I keep saying is don't start, for example, using GPT today and you're giving me answers using that GPT. You're doing a disservice to everyone, right? So like I think for my GPT, I've trained it for the last like 2 3 years. It's one of the things I keep saying, that's my things for inheritance in the will the GPT goes to, because it's a dossier that you keep improving over time. And you keep improving in terms of feed it content, feed it material that you want it to think about, ask the questions, annotate for it, um, give it the thumbs down when it gives you a bad answer, give responses in real time. So, yeah, I think that's a big.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely, because I mean, and just to put it out there also that anybody that is copying and
mm,
pasting email suggested by GPT and sending it to us, we know you've written that with Chat GPT. Like, yeah, thumbs up. Like, you're right. We're not saying don't use AI. We're saying use it whilst thinking,
mm,
whilst enabling it to think also. And like you said, AI is not neutral and not just copying and pasting what it gives you.
Like the email thing, because I feel like it's also we are getting lost because like there are things that AI should be doing and other things that really we should keep thinking. And I feel like this is a conversation where we keep saying now kids can't write using pens, right? And it's an art that you lose over time because you're only typing. And it's the same thing for the more and more that you keep telling your email, just write for me an email response. And it's you're switching off your thinking and your creativity things. So I think it's also very imperative that we decide that this task I can outsource. But this particular task I don't need to outsource for this. Like it's okay for my email to come sounding as raw and not as polished, like just sounding as human as possibly can be. It's okay for that to happen, but like I can utilize AI for something else, maybe the patterns or helping me do my to-do list for the day because I have 100 tasks. So yeah.
Absolutely. And also, just on the important issue you also raised there around who owns AI, ChatGPT, who owns these platforms, right? It's usually a white male in Silicon Valley, right? That's never even stepped into, that still thinks Africa is a country,
Yes.
that kind of thing, just to put it simplistically.
Yes.
But we do have the African Union does have the Continental Artificial Intelligence Strategy, and I
Mm,
would really encourage everybody to go and have a look at that because that's really talking about what does AI look like for our
our
context,
context.
right?
Yes.
Because we also have the power to start creating our own. And these strategies, these documents are examples of how we can begin to think about that for our context. So the foundation already exists. It's just for us now to proactively go after them and say, okay, based on this continental strategy, based on kind of all of these experiences that we're sharing, what are we going to do? What
Mm.
am I literally going to do as an agent of force in this space?
100%. Yeah, because the more we also stay passive, it also means that they continue to make them, and we continue to be used to build. Just in the sense of, for example, like GPT, they built it Silicon Valley, but Africans are the ones training it, right, and getting very poor pay while at it. Yeah, so you're very right, Dr. Yemisi. We do need to get our feet in, and I think people are. And maybe the other struggle here is we need to more or less one channel, if we're in spaces where like we have access to funds, we need to channel more funds towards like people building solutions, Africans specifically building solutions for the African space. And then the second thing for me would be the people who've built, there's need so for example, like even with the conferences that we have, like we need to have spaces where we are showcasing a bit more of like what AI things are we doing actually, right? Let's give people platforms to talk about their work, and like amplify. Let's amplify a bit more because it's also that sometimes we do not actually know that the kind of work you're doing exists. Mm.
Absolutely. And just to take us back to TFGBV,
Yes, yes.
you spoke earlier on about media doing enough to talk about this and to raise awareness, call out the platforms. What would you looking forward? What would you like to see media organizations, journalists, content producers do better at when telling stories of GBV, when experiencing technology facilitated gender-based violence? How should we expect media to be more proactive in that space?
So I'm going to take this now back to methodology. So our strategy must be through the methodologies we're using to collect, to hold and honor the data of like harm that has been caused, and like also the stories of the survivors, right? And I think I want to be very categorical and say that methodology is also very political. It's not neutral. And just that we're mimicking the same way. AI is not neutral. Your methodology cannot be neutral. And I think for me, I'll talk about four methodologies which I am currently exploring and hoping to see a bit more. So I think the first one for me has been the participatory. So like let survivors be more or less at the forefront of this. So for instance, let's say you're collecting data on the the AI, the porn gen AI, right? And it's let people, for example, have a space where they're able to. And I think I really like this from the training that we had. There's a group, Ahmed, Dr. No, Engineer Ahmed from Egypt has a form where women can fill in any kind of like harassment that they've been facing, give context, and like it's fully pseudonyms, right? But now what this enables people to do is you curate or you co-build something with the survivor. They're not just data points, right? Your database is informed by very lived experiences. And I think for this is important because a lot of the ways we report on TFGBV is shaped by the Western lens. But that's because we don't have data sets to go back and be like, so this and these are the patterns we're seeing across our space in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Malawi, right? So I think for me, one, I think is that participatory. The second thing I'm really looking at is us being able to audit. I want to see more audits of AI development and practices. Um, so more things which are annotated, like for example, in local languages. Let's see people talk about like these tools and give nuance. For example, like the bias audits we're doing for Google Notebook. So I'm running a separate thing called the conflict ledger, and like part of the thing that we do is after the podcast is created on Notebook, we do a bias audit. And part of the bias audits is being able to say where or how the model missed or didn't like or was aligned to cultural realities. I'll give an example with in one of the episodes you notice where the model has assigned the man as the expert, no, as the interviewer, yes, the lady as the expert, but her voice is devoid of emotion. It's
Right.
emotionless, right? And in African context, like women are a big part of like the people who carry like emotions and like the people who hold them. Even
Expressive also. We're very
very expressive
expressive. Yeah.
even as experts, like it does not take away. It's part of like what makes you human. So I think that was one of the things like we noticed whenever like they assign or we ask the model to assign women as an expert, they make them devoid of emotion completely. So I think for us it's about being able to also audit. Let's audit from that point of view. For not only am I going to audit your code, I'm also going to audit you for language, for culture, for, even power. Like how in the interview, how is it that when the woman is speaking and she's the expert or she's an interviewer, she sounds like she doesn't know anything. She's in class being taught with us, right? But I can see when it's a man interviewing, he has capacity to hold space for certain conversations. So like those small things, they might look very minute, but you see that's the more of us producing podcasts and not calling it out, it means the model is being reinforced as like you're reinforcing bad behavior in the model. So I think I do want to see more auditing practices. And then lastly, I want to see more, I'll say, trauma informed design principles added to tools or even to like stories. And I'll say, for example, like in the most basic way, it's the language. And I think Chigali has really captured some of the ways because one of the questions I really liked from class was how will my story be interesting if I can't put like the sensationalized aspect, right? And I was like, that's a very interesting question. But like you see, there is also like it's about us learning to play with language in a way that we're able to communicate, but without with it being more trauma informed. Like trauma informed doesn't mean boring. It does not mean flat. So I think for me that's been a big one, because I think interacting also with TFGBV data is like realizing, as I was, for example, putting together the material for the sessions, it's very traumatizing for a lot of people, even for us. It's something that you have, because, and again, it's because of the language, the way people describe the things, the way people write, the way people talk about it. Um, so I think that's something I'm really looking forward to, and like I'd also like for us to explore different formats, because writing, I feel like writing is not doing us like a good service in terms of capturing the nuance of TFGBV. And I'll put it in very plain way, in the way that if, for example, Dr. Yemisi, we were to text and email about this conversation, it would not have the same depth we've had right now. So I think I'd like for journalists to also explore different mediums. Let's explore mediums that allow for nuance, that allow for space to be held, and that also allow for time.
And of course, amongst these survivors that we're talking about are the women in media themselves, the journalists, the content producers who themselves are quietly surviving, either because they themselves have personal experience of GBV, or as journalists, they are obviously facing, and media producers facing various forms of gender related violence in their line of work as well. So, what would you say to someone, to our listeners, who wants to work in storytelling or tech but feels unsafe or unwelcome?
So first, I will say believe you, because I know it's very hard to like come out and first say it. Even when you've not said it and you know it's happening, sometimes you don't even clock it until like you're out of the context. Um, so I think for me, one, it's to say that we are in an unsafe world whether we do or we don't. And it's going to be a thing for ground in community. Make sure you're not doing this work alone. I like to say this work is expensive in terms of care. You're going to have to put in a lot into your everyday care, into your everyday, like small things that fill your pockets. So if it's working out, it's the baking, it's like the little things you need to do on a day to day, make sure you do it. And maybe lastly, the other thing I'd say is do it afraid. A lot of the work and a lot of times I'm moving through this space, I'm shaking in my boots. Um, and I'll also say the work, just also in terms of like sometimes you're doing work which will shake you to the core in terms of believing in humanity, right? And I think it's also important that we come to this space like open to the experience of like faith losing a lot of faith in systems and in humanity. um, but like I think also be very grounded about your why. It's going to be tough and you'll need a very clear this is my why at any particular time. And I feel like one of the things I keep telling people, for instance, is also like know yourself. And like again, I talked about limitations, right? And I talked about like the places where you're willing to go and where you're not willing to go. And I think for me, for instance, one of the things I know and I've always been telling people is I know that I might make the error of one day amplifying a falsified claim, right? But I rather err to the side of that and apologize, or even like, yeah, I'll deal with the consequences of that if it ever happens, than teeter to the side of not believing a survivor or a victim. So I think for me, it's also like know the concessions you're willing to make and also communicate them to the people you're working with. So for the people I'm working with at the AI Salon, they know. And like if ever we have to make decisions, maybe that's also the other thing where we have come up or with very specific, like let's say checklists. So we have a bias checklist, we have a defamation checklist, we have like different checklists for different things. Because I've also come to realize when you're in the heat of the moment and you need to make decisions about what you need to do, especially as a collective, you don't want to afford the mistake of making decisions at the height of emotion. Um, so ground it in a thing that exists before you start the work. right? Let's say that we risk defamation. So these are the checklists for the things we're going to do for any story. And if it passes this, no matter how anyone is feeling in the group, so long as it's passed this checklist, it's going, right? Or if it fails, it's not going anywhere, no matter how strongly you feel about it. So I think that also maybe will be the other thing for ground it in frameworks. And Chigali Declaration is also here as a brilliant thing. I think we can all collectively continue co-building and making stronger and localize, right? Make it better for your local context in your local languages. I really like that there's a Somali translation. We need more, and like annotate for context, annotate for things, and like let Chigali guide you in terms of the checklist that you might need, the guardrails that you might need in terms of like this work. And maybe lastly, it's remember you're not working in this alone, and try in as much as possible to never pick up a thing and run alone. Find community. Always, I promise there is like two, three more people who are willing to be in the inner kitchen with you as you grow that thing. So let people hold your hand, like delegate what you can. For example, like also like understand like our context, right? So I think one of the things I've been learning watching one of my very close friends work on a story has been, for example, we know this particular person will not listen to women or won't give you the answers you need. Engage that journalist who's a male ally, right? Let them do that grilling for you. You don't have to suffer through everything. This is not a punishment. So I think that would be the main things I tell the people who want to venture into this space. And also, tech is fun and it's hard, and people will make you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but I promise you do. You actually do know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to say that if anybody wants to learn more about the Kigali Declaration, just visit africanwomeninmedia.com/declaration. It's the Kigali Declaration on the elimination of gender violence in and through media in Africa by 2034, which was co-produced by the AWIM community in 2023. Thank you so much, Mwenda, for your time today. It's been such a pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed my time with you. I think we have a lot of conversations to have about around tea
Yes.
but also but also around data sets and AI and all of that. So definitely our conversation will continue beyond this. So thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you for inviting me.
So Wende reminds us that data isn't neutral. AI isn't neutral. It's shaped by who gets counted, who's producing these AI platforms, and who's getting erased. And as generative AI becomes more powerful, we need storytellers like Mwende, um, brave enough to collect what's missing and wise enough to tell us to care about what's missing. So thank you for listening to Her Media Diary. If you found today's conversation inspiring, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it. If you'd like to join me on an episode of the podcast, send me an email at yemisi@africanwomeninmedia.com or visit our website at hermediadiary.com. So that's the podcast website. And of course, our main website is africanwomeninmedia.com. Subscribe, follow Her Media Diary on your favorite podcasting platforms, and tune in to our partner radio stations, which you can find across various African countries. And don't forget, join the conversation using the hashtag Her Media Diary. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep amplifying the stories that matter.